I'd believe that I am far from alone in thinking that Gran Turismo's old school career modes were some of the better sim racing campaigns in history. I'd also say that, especially lately, a lot of us older gamers are reflecting back at the good old days of arcade racing, maybe even at actual arcades, playing Ridge Racer or Drift Out on the weekends and after school. Well, what if I told you that you could have all the nostalgia of a retro arcade racer packaged inside a Gran Turismo style single player career? Meet Super Woden GP2, a brand new game released by a solo dev that takes that old school GT career formula and throws it into an isometric retro arcade racer. This game was just recommended to me the other day by a few members of my community, and at less than $15, I figured what the heck, there isn't much to lose, and it looks like it has some charm. And now, only about 10 hours in at the time of writing, I can safely say that this game has plenty of charm, and love and nostalgia in droves. Like I've been mentioning, the overall structure of Super Woden is very Gran Turismo inspired, with a somewhat abstract city layout for your main menu, with dealerships, race portals, and other locations scattered throughout. For racing, you can compete in the headlining multi-race SWGP championship events that award big credits and cars upon winning. You could jump into long, grueling endurance races where you have to keep your car from breaking down by driving clean throughout the whole event. Then there are the bread and butter casual weekend single races that are often themed around specific cars or classes. Or there's a full rally mode with multi-stage events that requires you to have a specific rally spec car at certain horsepower limits. There's even a decently well-featured local split-screen multiplayer with up to 4 players, and the online time trial mode with leaderboards and regularly rotating events. And this is just the main race menu. There's a fully separate and fairly well-featured arcade rally mode, and a free-play time trial where you can just take any of your owned cars around any track in the game. Now, across all of these game modes, you'll be able to drive over 180 different cars from 9 different countries on 35 different tracks, half of which are circuits, with the rest being point-to-point rally stages. And you might have noticed some familiar cars and tracks here. Although Super Woden GP2 uses all non-licensed vehicles and tracks, you will probably still recognize many of your favorites. For example, we of course have Totally Not Laguna Seca here, alongside the famous Limestone Hatch, and who could forget the iconic Turn 1 experience of West Millswood. They even have Purple Mountain. Of course, the same story goes for the cars as well, with one in-game manufacturer for most major countries, like Soup for American makes, like the classic muscle car, the Gloria, or this rally icon, the Rogers. And if we head over to the Japanese manufacturer, Raven, we can see that not only do they have a friggin' Snake 3 in the game, they also have an actual Japanese touring spec variant with the Minolta livery, Minolto livery, and tri-spoke wheels. I am in heaven. Oh, and there's a Castrol livery for it too. And if this makes you think of another car, yes, they do have the Tom's Castrol Mark IV in this game. Now, if you do just want to give the cars their real names, the dev has actually just put everything in a text file that you can edit with these instructions, and someone from the community has already made a full file with all the real names for each car, which I would really recommend using because it's worth knowing what all these amazing cars actually are. Honestly, the car list in Super Woden is so amazingly well curated. There are so many racing and rally icons from all over the world with a lot of famous liveries to match. And the vast majority of these cars can also be upgraded in the workshop, where you can add more power, give the car grippier tires, improve its durability with the chassis, and more. And if the Gran Turismo DNA wasn't obvious enough already, the workshop is also where you can wash your car or give it an oil change. So I think it's clear that there is a solid amount and variety of content here, especially for the price they're asking. But of course, we gotta talk about the driving itself. All of the racing is done from a fixed camera in an isometric style. You have a small amount of control over the zoom level, but it does auto zoom depending on your speed, and I'll say right off the bat that this style won't be for everyone. You do get corner warnings that show up as a double exclamation flash and an audio cue on screen for road races, and you get some simple pace notes in rally. But for the most part, especially in the faster cars, staying on the road all comes down to just knowing the track. Now, of course, Super Woden does ease you into the game by starting you out in very slow and easy to drive vehicles where you have plenty of time to see and think about your next corner. But as you progress through the ranks and get towards the about 500 horsepower range, the cars just start moving so quick that the warnings don't always come fast enough, and you need to either be checking your minimap for every corner, or again, just already know the track pretty well. Now for me, as someone who's just kind of getting into that 500 horsepower range of the career, the camera is starting to feel like less of a fun challenge and more of a feature I wish I could adjust. I fully respect the decision to stick with this camera angle. Stylistically, I think it's great. It fits the era that the game is supposed to represent. At slower speeds, it works just fine. And once you learn a track, the feeling of committing blindly into a corner that you can't even see yet is actually pretty fun. But I do think that this is going to turn some players off, and it does make the experience pretty challenging at those higher car classes. I do think a wider zoom would certainly help attract a wider audience to a degree, but I would at least just like to see the corner warnings come a bit earlier in faster cars, so I have the time to slow down and react to unknown corners. None of this is helped by the fact that going off track is really punishing. All of the off-track surfaces will slow you down tremendously, and racing in Super Woden is all about maintaining momentum. So going off track can easily cost you a couple positions, and swiping walls or barriers can bring you to a full stop in no time. So even though there is adjustable AI that allows you to play against pretty casual opponents, and you can even turn off damage if you want, I still wouldn't recommend this game to someone that isn't looking for a challenge. That said, it's worth pointing out that this is kinda how games were back in the good old days. They were unforgiving and required repetition to master. And in a large way, Super Woden is the same. And there is a certain, perhaps masochistic retro charm to that, which I've admittedly connected with a lot while playing. Sometimes just bashing my head against a difficult challenge until I master every single part of it ends up giving me some of the best, most rewarding feelings in gaming. And I'm gonna channel every video game reviewer ever by saying this, but it's kinda like the Dark Souls 1 of racing games. Unforgiving and a bit clunky, but so rewarding once you find the ins and outs and master the challenge. Now, we've spent a good bit of time talking about everything surrounding the driving, but haven't actually discussed the driving physics themselves, which I do really enjoy. It's an obviously quite arcade-style handling model that favors drifting, and is pretty easy to pick up, and I think really satisfying. Every car does have its own stats, and this will tweak the handling characteristics a bit, but by and large, every car brakes really well, making it easier to slow down for blind corners. The steering is smooth, heavy, and predictable across the board, with none of the cars really feeling too twitchy or uncontrollable. And taking corners is just really fun, with an emphasis on weight shift, momentum, and power sliding through most even somewhat tighter corners. The physics are simple but satisfying, and that's all they need to be. In Super Woden, the challenge comes more from mastering the track, not necessarily the car. Once you know the right line and when to hit your brakes or turn in, you can do it pretty much every time with ease. And this leads again to that kind of Dark Souls style of gameplay where you're initially presented with a seemingly impossible challenge that thoroughly defeats you. But then, through repeated attempts, you learn the moves, you figure out where you need to improve and what you need to do, and when you beat the challenge, it feels great. And you can then just go back and beat it again and again with ease because now you know the technique. This happened to me first at the 3rd WGP Championship, a 3-race event with a 300 horsepower limit that takes place on some pretty technical tracks. I bought a Mark III just for this championship, fully upgraded it to just under that 300 horsepower limit, and could hardly make it into the top 10 in each race. I was just getting destroyed out there and thought that I must have just brought the wrong car or something, but I wanted to learn the tracks anyway, so I kept at it with the Supra and went from 11th overall to 8th to 2nd, and then finally was tied for 1st going into the last race and came down the final straight of the last lap with half of a car length ahead of the next driver at the finish line. It felt so damn good. And then I went on to absolutely smoke the BTC championship on the first try, which felt nice too. And this is maybe a good spot to talk about the career progression. As I've said, and as you can probably tell, this is a very Gran Turismo-esque career structure, complete with some of the good and bad of the older games. The difficulty balance does seem to spike and dip at times, with some events being pretty easy to complete on the first try, and others taking quite a few attempts. I haven't really found this to be a problem personally, in fact I kind of like that variety, but I figure it's worth pointing out that my experience at least with the difficulty has been a bit all over the place. Super Woden can certainly be grindy as well, if you're not playing optimally. If you have fond memories of this bad boy from Gran Turismo 4, well then trust me, you'll love winning the Sup Gloria from the Junior Cup and selling it off for a cool 3,600 credits after every win. Or you could do either of these races pretty early on in the Caterham for a quick 4,500 every 3-ish minutes. And as you progress further, you'll unlock better events to grind out some quick credits. Just about every event in Super Woden GP2 is locked behind a star requirement, and you get stars by doing well in events you've already unlocked. There's not a lot of choice in your progression here. It's not like there are dozens of extra stars to earn and lots of different paths to choose to unlock the events you want to race in. It's fairly linear, with some wiggle room, but especially considering that you won't be overflowing with credits either, my advice to anyone would be to purchase your cars wisely. Many events require specific cars or car types, and having the right vehicles will make earning stars so much easier. If you want to move through the career quickly, looking at all the events and only buying what you need to compete is the way to go. That said, if you're more like me and don't really care about progressing quickly and don't mind a bit of grinding, there's still a lot of fun to be had. I have thoroughly enjoyed just running these Caterham races back to back a few times to build up some credits, and then spending those on all sorts of goofy slow cars, which I then take into the championships to see how they'll do. Now, if I did want to add something to the career, it certainly would be more events, especially for the lower classes. I feel like I progressed out of the cheap car ranks so quickly, and I wish I had more events to use them with, because there are so many budget sports cars in the game, and this, in theory, would also help with progression as well, by giving players a wider variety of options for earning stars. But even with the current event list, the replayability is totally still there for me. Again, the driving is very fun when you master the tracks, and the leaderboards for every race always push me to refine my lines or try new cars. And I know it's simple, but I'm a huge sucker for stat screens, so I love being able to see my whole career at a glance here. And with that, I do want to wrap up this video by bringing up the graphics and the audio. I think, as someone who did grow up going to actual arcades to play games that looked like this, and having a Sega Genesis at home to play, for example, the first 3D racing game, Hard Drivin', and then finally getting an N64 years later only to fall in love with Ridge Racer, for me, this art style just oozes nostalgia. And I love that we even get these retro filters that can pixelate the graphics or give it a sort of CRT look. It all really connects to me and my childhood, but I am actually pretty curious if the younger generation, or even just people who didn't really play games growing up, would still connect with this art style and think it's as interesting and cool as I do. And as you can probably guess, for a game that has a more simplistic look, the game runs well too. I average above 180 FPS on my beefy PC at 1440 ultra-wide, but it actually also runs pretty dang well on my Steam Deck, usually floating around 60 with some rare dips into the mid-40s, but it still doesn't really hurt the experience, at least to me. I do wish we had a few more video options here. Really, all we can do is turn AO on or off and then mess with those filters. There's no in-game FPS cap or deeper graphical settings, but these are minor nitpicks, and some of which are easy enough to find solutions for outside of the game. Now, as for the audio, I will say that outside of the music, the audio experience is nothing exceptional, but perfectly passable. The cars don't really sound especially unique or exciting, and the menu navigation sounds or audio cues are totally fine, but the music is great and really carries the in-race energy with a bunch of upbeat retro-style jams, some of which even seem to call out songs from Gran Turismo, like GT4's Panama by Van Halen, reflected in Mud in Your Face. It's a great track list if you're into this kind of upbeat rock and chiptune style. And now that I'm getting to the bottom of the script here, I realized that what I wanted to just be a quick thoughts video about the game in order to draw some attention to an experience I was having fun with has now kind of turned into a full-length review. So to be clear again, I'm only like 10 hours into the game. There is still plenty of content left for me to discover, and this is by no means a full review. But it is just a video I wanted to make to show off a cool game that I think deserves the attention. It can sometimes be hard to sift through the pile of sometimes not so great smaller racing titles to find these gems, and a game like this is easy to miss or even ignore completely. But some indie racers have actually been some of my favorite games because of how much they just overflow with style and passion, and Super Woden GP2 is absolutely one of those games. Alright everyone, if you do decide to check this game out, or if you've already been playing it, or even played its prequel, let me know what you think of it. I'm curious to see how others feel about a game like this. Thanks all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.